I'm convinced that this raid was as much about, there are lots of reasons, I think, for this illicit raid. And one of the reasons was they were concerned that Trump had the goods on them. Let's begin with the beginning, which is the current crisis as it relates at least to government corruption, or at least the core part of it, is the Biden raid, the unjustified raid on the home of former President Trump that took place not too long ago. It was, they tell us, about getting presidential records and potentially classified information back. And as Judicial Watch has highlighted, based on our experience on a similar case related to Clinton's tapes of Bill Clinton conducting government business, including communications with foreign leaders, which are presumably classified, the Justice Department, the Biden administration, and the National Archives changed their minds, did a 180-degree spin to go after Trump for these records, when in fact, when we asked them to do that with President Clinton's records, they said, oh, you can't do that. In fact, the fact that he has them after he leaves office means they're presumably personal. And then they go ahead and take the completely opposite position and raid Trump's home. Now, President Trump has tried to highlight what I've called the Clinton sock drawer case, because he kept these tapes supposedly in his sock drawer with the lower courts and with the appeals court, because of course the government appealed, to bring you up to date, the special master ruling by Judge Cannon. And they appealed specifically the part of the ruling that restricted the Biden operation from using for a criminal investigation, or reviewing for a criminal investigation, or any criminal investigation, the supposedly classified documents that they seized from Trump's home. Now, of course, the argument is, as Judge Cannon noted, well, are they classified or not, given the issues that Judicial Watch has raised, or that were raised in the Judicial Watch case, and that was brought to the attention of the court by Trump's team. Now, the appeals court overruled Judge Cannon on that specific matter. So the special master's continuing to look at the other documents to figure out what kind of documents they are or aren't. But the classified records for now will be kept from the court, will be kept from Trump, will be kept from the American people, which of course is very convenient and helpful to the Biden operation that has already leaked some of this material, or tried to describe some of this material, my guess is misleadingly, to news organizations, left-wing news organizations, and you can bet there'll be more leaks. And they'll be trying to launder the information through supposed briefings that are required of people like Adam Schiff in Congress. So that's the situation we're facing. We're also facing a situation where the courts don't seem to understand the Presidential Records Act. Now, the Presidential Records Act, as explained by the court in the Clinton case that we pursued, and of course she was analyzing appellate court and Supreme Court cases about presidential records. The president is the decider-in-chief, and he gets to decide what are presidential records and what are personal records. And in the case of, let's say, Bill Clinton taking records with him after he left the White House, and they said, well, we just presume they're personal. And the law, once that decision is made, gives no authority to the archives or anyone else in the federal government, the archives, the Justice Department, or the FBI, to second-guess them. They don't have any criminal authority to go look and get those records, and they have no even civil authority to go and get those records, as Judicial Watch learned directly. Of course, the first rule of the Justice Department is to protect the Clinton gang and abuse Trump. So they changed their views on that and went after Trump. Now, Trump is trying to highlight this issue to alert the courts to it, but the appellate court wasn't terribly interested in it. I mean, one thing that the Trump team should be doing is that they should be more specific as they raise these issues in the courts. Meaning, it's one thing to say that you've got this Clinton sock drawer case out there and take a look at this. It's another thing to say that means these records are all personal. That means these records are all necessarily not classified and personal. That means all of these records are not, quote, presidential records. That decision's already been made by Trump, practically speaking, in that he has them. Now, of course, the left is mocking President Trump, even though, again, he's right. When he told Fox News' Sean Hannity earlier this week, is all he has to do is think about declassifying records, and they're declassified. And then he moves them, obviously, as it looks like was done when records were moved to Mar-a-Lago as he left office. And now the left is like joking, oh, you just can't think records to be. Of course, that's so dishonest. But what the president is saying is that he's reviewing records. He makes a mental note that I want to keep these as personal records. I'm putting them in this pile, and they're going down to my house. That's all that's required. So yeah, he can think that records are declassified, and as a result, him moving and shuffling the papers along to a certain pile, more or less, they become his. That's the reality of the law. And the courts don't want to grapple with it. They don't understand it. Judge Deary doesn't seem to understand it because Judge Deary, who is the special master who was appointed, and as I pointed out last week, Judge Deary is a senior judge up in New York. He's been around for a long time. He served on the FISA court. He approved, as I understand it, the 4th FISA warrant targeting Trump with this outrageous spying. You know, the cutout target was Carter Page, but the goal was to spy on Trump. He didn't question it. He held no hearing on it. And so what do you think Judge Deary's going to do when he's asked to, as he was initially asked to, figure out whether these records are classified or not? He's going to defer to the government, which it looks like he was presuming to do or getting ready to do until the appellate court ruled and took these records away from his jurisdiction. The same thing goes for the appellate court. They don't understand the Presidential Records Act. Now, supposedly there are 2 Trump appointees on this panel. It was a 3-0 decision, but I don't care. I mean, I dispute their analysis here. And I'm going to read you the key part here of this decision that the left is highlighting. Plaintiff suggests that he may have declassified these documents when he was president. Now, the plaintiff obviously is Trump. But the record contains no evidence that any of these records were declassified. And before the special master, plaintiff resisted providing any evidence he had declassified any of these documents. In any event, at least for these purposes, the declassification argument is a red herring because declassifying an official document would not change its content or render it personal. So even if we assume that the president did declassify some or all of the documents, they would not explain why he has a personal interest in them. And that was their analysis, meaning, well, he doesn't have a personal interest in them, so there's really no reason for the court to review them. Well, that's a fundamental understanding and kind of a logical fallacy of as it relates to the Presidential Records Act. The only way these records would have been, in my estimation, I shouldn't say the only way, the most likely way, and what's being argued here, is they would have been declassified in virtue of the fact they were in his possession and necessarily personal. So if they're personal, it means they're declassified. The Presidential Records Act assumes all these other records laws, including laws related to classified information. So the president could look at classified information, say, I want to keep this as a personal record, and it becomes declassified. And no one's allowed to second guess that. At least I don't understand how that could be second guessed under the law, and certainly the judge in the Clinton Sockdora case suggested that there was no way to second guess that. And she's one of the most liberal judges in the city up here in D.C. So do you understand, I hope, the kind of illogic and the failure to grapple with the Presidential Records Act? Now, some of that is they highlight, well, he didn't say he declassified them. Well, technically, it might have helped. And if I were Team Trump, I'd be really specific about these arguments as to why they apply to these specific documents. But they don't have to under this analysis of the law. And they've ignored that. They've ignored the application of the Presidential Records Act and his ability to make them personal or otherwise. So it was a judicial fail by the 11th Circuit in allowing the Biden operation to keep these so-called classified records secret still from the American people. Now, as Trump has suggested, and I've suggested, I'm convinced that this raid was as much about, there are lots of reasons, I think, for this illicit raid. And one of the reasons was they were concerned that Trump had the goods on them. Like shortly before he left office, he declassified certain Russiagate records that showed the corruption of the Justice Department and the FBI in the targeting of him under the Obama era and during the era of the ascendant deep state that was in control of the FBI and Justice Department that was targeting him even when he was president. And there were other records maybe related to Ukraine that were declassified. I don't know. He says maybe they were worried about Hillary Clinton. He's not saying I had Hillary Clinton's emails. He's just opining, President Trump was, as to what they were nervous about. And one way to ensure that records that are supposed to be declassified and should be potentially available to the American people are kept away is to come in and mislead the courts about the nature of the law and mislead the American people and mislead Congress by saying he had personal records he wasn't supposed to have, or classified records he wasn't supposed to have. Now, Judicial Watch, just shortly before they conducted this raid, we sued for the records he declassified about this Russiagate scandal just before he left office. Now, those records supposedly in large part were at the Justice Department. What better way to say, well, they're not really declassified, as to go and try to find him in his home and say they're classified again. So in many ways, this is a shell game, it looks to me, that the Biden operation is playing by using a false legal analysis to try to classify records or to suggest that records have always been classified when in fact that isn't the case. And of course, the side benefit of that is it puts Trump in legal jeopardy, or at least that's what they hope. So this is the rule of law crisis we're facing. And because Judicial Watch has understood that this scheme was afoot from the get-go, the media has been coming after us. We, back in February, and it's worth repeating, when I learned and Judicial Watch learned that the president had voluntarily turned over records that the National Archives had pretended were presidential records, I'm like, what? I said, what's happening here? This was a completely different legal position than they had beat us with previously on the Clinton sock drawer records. And I started calling attention to this. They're not presidential records, at least as way the Justice Department used to say, at least as the court said, at least as the National Archives said, and they had no business harassing you for them. That was our analysis, and I made that quite clear publicly. So we were fighting this and highlighting this, and then the media, after this raid takes place, they start reporting, that Tom Fitton was advising Trump to keep the classified records. Now, I'm not going to tell the media, and I'm not even going to tell you whether or not I've been, quote, advising Trump on anything. It's none of their business. But I've been quite public that, yes, he has a right to these records. They're personal records. And one solution he could have made, or a compromise, if he didn't want to kind of fight tooth and nail on this, was to turn the records over that were in dispute and then just resolve it in the civil context by going to the courts to assert his personal interest in them. But the left is just outraged that I've been telling the truth about this. And they're even more outraged that I might have been telling Trump about this. I mean, and that shows you how really desperate the left is. And of course, they're trying to say, well, Tom Fitton isn't a lawyer. Why is he talking to Trump about this? Or why is he even having an opinion on this? Well, first of all, Judicial Watch is a national watchdog organization that's been litigating records cases for 30 years. So, and of course, this is a policy and constitutional dispute, but I don't need to tell you that. I mean, it shows you how that touch the left would be, that somehow they think criticizing me for not being a lawyer actually persuades people of anything. I have a feeling that many of you probably think more highly of me because I'm not a lawyer. And that being said, Judicial Watch has a great staff of lawyers who do some of the most significant legal work and frankly, in modern history in terms of government accountability. Just to show you how desperate, MSNBC, I think, between two shows, spent 15 minutes attacking me in Judicial Watch. Helpfully, it looks like they either were quoting me, talking about all sorts of issues that they thought would be embarrassing to me, but I'm glad they quoted, because I think certainly viewers on MSNBC need to see it. I think we have a clip here we'll play.
So that's a guy named Tom Fitton. He's like a second, third tier conservative activist, head of the right-wing group Judicial Watch. They've been around for forever. Somewhat ludicrous figure, honestly. I'd put him in the Ginny Thomas category of the American right. Imagine a more senior James O'Keefe on steroids.
So as you can see from that clip, they're kind of crazed about this, aren't they? And, they're attacking me for not being a lawyer, attacking me based on my physical appearance, all very high quality arguments about what, while refusing to address the fundamental issue is, why did the Justice Department, why did the federal government change its position on presidential records to raid Trump's home? That a position now that would require them, for instance, to raid Clinton's home. And who knows how many other former presidents' homes, given their new analysis as to what constitutes records that presidents are allowed to have versus not allowed to have. So my view is the more the media talks about the Clinton sock drawer case and Judicial Watch's involvement in it, the better, because it will help educate more people and further expose the scam, sham, abusive raid on President Trump. And of course, the abuse continues. There's no president in the history of America that has faced more government corruption, abuse, and harassment than President Trump. We saw it with Russia. We saw it with the impeachment for Ukraine, for his daring to highlight the corruption of the Biden gang and Ukraine's involvement in the Russia smears against him and being concerned about corruption generally in Ukraine. I mean, they impeached him for doing his job. And then they had the smears related to January 6th. They impeached him again, even though he wasn't going to be president anymore. And none of that worked, right? So now we're with the raid. But that isn't even enough. That doesn't seem to be working. You had the politicized Attorney General in New York, Letitia James, who ran for office literally promising to target Trump. She came into office and said, I'm going to get Trump and I'm going to find something on him, which is the complete opposite of what prosecutors are supposed to ethically do, which is if they come across evidence of a crime, they go after someone. You don't go after someone and then find some evidence of a crime because you don't like them, is what they did with Trump. So they filed this absurd civil lawsuit against Trump and his family, his 3 children, over valuations, arguing with him over valuations he made in getting loans and with various banks, all of which the banks made money on, so there were really no victims there. It's a completely politicized attack on Trump. I mean, it was so bad, that press conference where she said yesterday or earlier this week, it's not the art of the deal, it's the art of the steal. I mean, how is that appropriate for a prosecutor to be making statements like that at a press conference? I mean, it was so political, I was surprised there wasn't a balloon drop and campaign signs. I mean, that's what that was about. I mean, and of course, this prosecution or this civil suit was filed a little bit over a month before elections. So once again, you had the election interference of the Biden raid on Trump's home, and then they follow that up, and of course, Letitia James, who probably has national aspirations in the Democratic Party, well, I'm going to get in on this. let's sue Trump based on these trumped up civil fraud charges over real estate valuations. And by the way, if that's the new standard by which a New York attorney general or anyone can come after a citizen, if that's the kind of the low standard, none of you are safe. Every mortgage application you have can be examined by some federal bureaucrat or state bureaucrat or prosecutor out to get you. And you get one number wrong, it's fraud. That's the theory here. So it's never going to stop for Trump. It's never going to stop. And similarly, Judicial Watch is never going to stop opposing and highlighting this. This is not about whether one likes Trump's specific policy proposals and such, and we can always have debates about that, and I got my views, other people have their views. This is about whether or not someone who is politically inconvenient to people in power is going to be targeted and harassed, have his civil rights violated in egregious ways. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he has the wrong political outlook. And by defending Trump, we're defending everyone and rising to the occasion in terms of making sure that our government is unable to abuse anyone. And when that happens, we call it out. I tell you, if you're a Republican or Democrat and you're a political office holder, I don't trust this Justice Department to do anything apolitically. I mean, there's always a political component to what the Justice Department does, even when it's acting most ethically. But they can't be trusted to prosecute a jaywalking ticket these days. And what the FBI did to Mike Lindell, Lindell filed a lawsuit. He alleges that he was on his way back from a hunting trip. He and his buddy pull into a Hardee's restaurant. An FBI car zooms in front of him. An FBI car zooms in back of him, and one comes up along the side. 3 FBI vehicles. And they effectively detained him for 45 minutes, objected to him calling his lawyer. He had to push hard on that. They finally relented. And what are they going after him over? Essentially First Amendment activity related to his disputing the outcome of the 2020 elections. First Amendment protected activity. Concocting charges about changing records or touching a computer or something. It's a complete boulder dash. So this is today's FBI. So it's not just about Trump. Others are being targeted and abused as well. The great Biden suppression and oppression. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.